How would you like to live forever? If biology and medicine could offer you everlasting life, would you want it? And if not, why not? You need to think about these things because there's a man who believes that an end to old age and death might be just around the corner. How do you feel about the idea of living forever?
I think it's rather a novel idea.
He thinks that we're clearly waiting for someone to help us, someone to save us, someone perhaps with a large red beard.
He sees himself as a savior, as somebody who will save hundreds of thousands of lives.
He's the herald of a new civilization, of a new kind of science.
He's marvelous. I mean, he thinks the same way I do.
He's a movement. He's not just a man. He's a movement.
Aubrey is just like you and me, puts his pants on the same way.
Seems to me this man could be put in jail with reasonable cause.
It's going to keep getting better from here.
I'm young, I'm healthy, and I just don't see why I should give that up piece by piece by piece as the molecular rot inside my cells takes over.
Living 1,000 years and never having, like, a creme brulee strikes me as a waste of time.
Do you want to live forever?
No.
I don't want to be sort of yoked to someone who's really busy dying.
I want to live a long time. I want to live a long time.
This is a strange story about our deepest fears, hopes, and dreams. And the most important question of all, what shall we do about death?
Death is not the worst. There are things more horrible than death. Can you imagine enduring centuries, experiencing each day the same futile things?
For me, it all began at opening time in a famous pub in Cambridge. The same pub Crick and Watson liked to go to when they were unravelling the secret of DNA. I'd come to meet Aubrey de Grey, a brilliant biogerontologist, a scientist who investigates aging. They say he's a genius, and the first time I saw a photograph of him, I knew I wanted to make a film about him. I've encountered genius before. Bob Dylan drew my picture while I tried to interview him. Arthur C. Clarke lent me his telescope.
And what is all those poses? No poses whatsoever!
The legendary film director Menachem Golan showed me how to make movies and gave me a part in one of his.
How can you be so sure, Agent?
And the great theoretical physicist and Nobel Prize winner Richard Feynman played the bongos for me just before he died. Dr. Aubrey David Nicholas Jasper de Grey is a Cambridge computer scientist turned biologist. He's 43 and he's obsessed with the question of why we get old and die. He doesn't think we need to do either.
Good morning. Hello, good morning. Can I have a pint of Abbott, please?
Incredibly, de Grey believes there are people alive today who will live 1,000 years or more.
I think that, given sufficient funding, we have a 50-50 chance of completely stopping people from dying of old age within about 25 or 30 years from now.
You really believe that?
Yes, I think we have enough detail now about how we would go about doing that we have a good chance of actually putting it all together and making it work in that sort of time frame.
And then de Grey began telling me amazing stories about life and death. How Hydra never die. How little dogs live so much longer than big dogs, and nobody knows why. He told me how scientists have found ways to make fruit flies double their lifespan. Nematode worms too, and they don't just live longer, they stay healthy almost until the day they die. De Grey told me about naked mole rats who live for ages and never get cancer. And laboratory mice who can heal holes in their ears and self-repair their own internal organs too. There are dwarf mice with just one altered gene who can live the equivalent of 140 human years. That's 20 years longer than the world record holder, Madame Jeanne Calment, who died in 1997 aged 122. And then he talked about Venice and how old houses can be kept going for centuries as long as you look after the gutters and plug the holes in the roof. You just repair them and replace the rotten bits before it's too late. De Grey thinks we can do the same with humans.
The kind of approach that's going to work is what you might think of as an ongoing maintenance approach. In the same way that it's possible to keep a car or a house going indefinitely if you put enough maintenance in. Similarly, for a much more complicated machine like the human body, it should in principle be possible to keep the body going, simply by repairing and making harmless the damage that accumulates as an intrinsic side effect of the operation of the machine.
And that's forever.
And that's forever.
He made it all sound so simple. So that evening and into the night, I wandered around Aubrey de Grey's vast website, which sets out the details of his grand plan to cure aging. It's called SENS, Strategies for Engineered Negligible Senescence. In other words, ways to stop you getting old and dying. It's bioengineering at the cellular and molecular level using things like stem cells and gene therapy. And the really great thing about SENS is you don't just live longer, you stay young. De Grey has been shaking up the scientific establishment. He thinks aging research is moving far too slowly, so in 2005 he invited scientists from all over the world to come to Cambridge to discuss his revolutionary ideas.
Come on, boys and girls, don't just stand around.
The group of people who are here may be the architects of the future of the human species.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming.
His aim was to bring together researchers from very different fields, people who don't normally talk to each other because their work is so specialized. Molecular biologists, geneticists, stem cell, cloning and gene therapy experts, and bioengineers. These are the people he needs to galvanize into action to help him make his SENS plan a reality.
Thank you for inviting me, Aubrey, and pushing me to really start thinking about senescence and immortality.
He is pushing people to try to imagine what they kind of dare not imagine. Aging is something that we've cared about for such a long time, and now people get excited because there's the possibility that we really might be able to intervene in that process. And I see Aubrey de Grey as a person who has really seized control of that and is trying to make it happen within his own lifetime.
De Grey wants to live forever, and he believes that when people realize what's possible, they will too. But what really struck me about him was his passion. He really cares about this.
About 100,000 people, 30 World Trade Centers every day die of aging.
I realized I'd never met anybody quite like Aubrey de Grey, a visionary, a prophet. If he's right, he'll be as famous as Newton or Einstein or Madonna. I had to find out all about Aubrey and his crusade to conquer death. Aubrey de Grey believes he's found the key to everlasting life. He's obviously brilliant, but is he right? I wanted to find out, which was how I found myself on the Thameslink platform at King's Cross at 6 o'clock one cold. If his ideas are scientifically valid, then what about the implications? If indefinite lifespan is on the cards, will people really want to live forever? And if they do, what would that mean for the world?
So what is it with you and death that you feel so strongly about?
Well, I find that it's a strange question when people say, you know, what's so bad about death? I mean, hey, hello, you know, I mean, the people tend to spend their entire lives avoiding death, you know, crossing the road carefully and stuff like that, you know. Why does people ask this question when it comes to aging? It seems completely anomalous to me that people should regard aging as some sort of exception to the general rule that death is actually not something to be desired.
Is it death or old age that's...
Well, of course, the main problem with aging is not just that it kills you, but that it kills you really horribly. You know, that it kills you very slowly and miserably, and that your death is preceded by this enormously long period of gradual decline, debilitation, and dependence and disease.
So how controversial are your ideas?
How controversial? Well, they're extremely controversial. A lot of people think that I'm completely crazy, and some people wish me luck, and they're doing their best to give me tacit support, and other people have very much come out against me and are ridiculing me and saying that my ideas are fantasy and so on.
In Tucson, on the way to the hotel, we got a chance to try out Aubrey's controversial ideas on the taxi driver.
But you've got a man in the back of your cab who believes that it might be possible to live indefinitely, maybe 500, 1,000 years. Does that seem crazy to you? Or?
It sounds very far-fetched. It doesn't, I don't see how it can even be possible. How could you make your heart and your veins last that long and everything function? Your liver has 500 functions. How, you know, it doesn't seem feasible that that could be possible.
Do you know what a vintage car is?
Pardon me?
Do you know what a vintage car is?
Yeah.
Okay, how old are they?
Oh, 100 years.
Okay,
No,
how old were
50.
they? Okay, so how old were they built to survive? How long were they built to survive?
Well, they replace parts in them.
Right. You can do that in principle with a machine like the human body. The parts are much, much smaller, but you can still do it.
How could you stop the aging process of your skin and
It's all about replacing parts, really, but at the really low microscopic level. So, of course, you don't replace, like, the whole of the liver or the whole of the brain in one go. You just replace one gene or one bit of a cell or something like that at a time. But it is, in principle, just the same as replacing the parts of a car when they need to be replaced. That's why it's not so far-fetched.
Well, something to think about.
Next morning, we hired a car, and as we drove through the desert towards Phoenix, I asked Aubrey to tell me more about the SENSE program and the 7 deadly things he says cause aging and death. I felt that if I could get the gist of this, I'd understand what Aubrey and his vision are all about.
The SENSE approach to defeating aging is a 7-point plan, really. And the first one is indigestible molecules. These things accumulate in the cell, inside the lysosome. The lysosome gets them, it fails to break them down, it just sequesters them. And for a long, long time, that's harmless. The cell just copes because the lysosome is keeping these toxic molecules.
I soon realized we'd never reach number 7 before we got to Phoenix.
So you want a quick version of the 7 deadly things? Well, okay, here you go.
Number 1 is cells that die off and aren't naturally replaced, like in the heart and brain. It's what causes Parkinson's disease, for example.
The idea is to replace these cells to help the body to maintain the number of cells in these tissues. And that's really what stem cell therapy is for.
The second deadly thing is the proliferation of unwanted cells, like fat cells which replace muscle and lead to diabetes. Aubrey's idea here is to trick them into destroying themselves.
One way that's quite promising is to use what's called suicide gene therapy, where you have a virus that carries a gene that's toxic to any cell where the gene is expressed.
Number 3 is the formation of links between certain proteins and the resulting loss of elasticity in tissues like artery walls, say, which causes high blood pressure.
It's, in theory, possible to invent drugs that will react with these bonds and break them.
Number 4 is about cellular garbage. For example, the buildup of bad stuff called amyloid between cells in your brain causes Alzheimer's. And with garbage inside the cells, you get problems like hardening of the arteries and heart disease. Aubrey wants to engineer genes and enzymes to digest this junk. And then he told me about how aging damages the micro-machines called mitochondria that produce energy for the cell's activities. He wants to do some fancy swapping around of the mitochondrial DNA to protect it.
And of course, to do this to actual people, you'll need very good gene therapy.
The seventh and last deadly thing is mutations in the chromosomes and runaway cell division. It's the big one, cancer.
That's it. All fixable in principle.
And they're all fixable in principle, and in fact, all of them are fixable foreseeably.
Two of Aubrey's biggest ideas are totally original. The first is a way to eliminate cancer, and it came to him one afternoon in Italy. Aubrey had been to a scientific conference in Ravenna, and with time to kill before the flight home, he thought he'd walk the few miles to the airport. Along the way, he happened across a tiny bar.
On March the 27th of 2002, I had probably the most radical and certainly one of the most important ideas that are part of my grand plan for fixing aging. It was basically halfway through my second litre of Tuborg that I realised how to cure cancer.
Aubrey thinks that cancer, all the different kinds of cancer, could be eliminated with something he calls WILT. Aubrey's good on acronyms, and this one stands for Whole Body Interdiction of Lengthening of Telomeres. The technical details are complex, but WILT is a radical bioengineering therapy which would destroy the replicating ability of all vulnerable cells in a person's body before they can become cancer cells, and replace them every 10 years or so with billions of new stem cells.
You were a computer scientist turned biologist, but how could you come up with an idea about cancer like that?
Research, and especially theoretical research, or well, concepts, the coming up with new ideas, is a very transferable skill. There's almost a reputation for people who switch fields, who learn their research in one area and move into a different area, have a very high hit rate of having radical new ideas that had escaped people who had been brought up in the same area all the time. It's because one's unencumbered by conventional wisdom, you see.
And this must be what's so special about Aubrey, his ability to see old problems in a completely new light. His other groundbreaking idea for staying alive involves people who are already dead. It came to him in a hotel room in Dresden. This is his plan to inject people with special enzymes to digest the cellular garbage that clogs up aging body tissues.
I realized that bacteria should exist that have the technology, have the enzymes, to break down these substances. And all we have to do is find these bacteria, get the enzymes out and put them into our bodies. The right place to look for these bacteria may very well be graveyards, because graveyards are of course full of human remains, so they are full of these substances that we want to get rid of. And bacteria therefore ought to exist that have worked out how to break those things down and live off them. So this is a therapy that may be possible quite soon.
Of course, quite soon might not be soon enough, at least for Aubrey. He talks about fixing old age within 25 or 30 years, but if it takes much longer, he'd be running out of time. So he has a backup plan. Back in Scottsdale, Arizona, Aubrey wanted to show me something.
That's new. I haven't seen that before.
The promise of more time has fascinated man from the beginning, always beckoning. More time for love. More time to experience life to the fullest. More time to see what the future will bring.
This is where you come when you're dead, if you have enough money and want to be frozen in liquid nitrogen until science finds a way to bring you back to life. Aubrey's an Alcor consultant, so when or if his time comes, they'll freeze him for free.
Come on in. Alcor's operating room. This is actually the second stage of the procedure in a cryonics operation. The first stage occurs in the field at the patient's bedside. Prior to pronouncement, setup is done, and then at the moment of pronouncement, an Alcor team takes over. Open heart surgery is done, a bypass operation to remove the blood and replace with something called a cryoprotectant. The point of this is to remove as much of the water as possible from the body to prevent freezing damage during the descent to liquid nitrogen temperatures. The intent is to preserve people at low temperatures until such time as the process can be reversed, whatever killed them can be cured, and they can be restored to health and released into society.
Well, you're smiling, is that because...
Because I think it's kind of cool. This is Alcor's patient care facility. This is where the patients are actually stored in giant stainless steel tanks called dewars. Alcor has 75 patients, all of which are stored in this room. Each one of these tanks holds up to anywhere from 9 patients, 4 whole bodies, 5 neuros, up to 45 neuro patients.
What's a neuro?
A neuropatient is a head-only preservation at this point in time, where the procedure itself focuses on preserving the brain directly and not the rest of the organs. The intent is to protect the personality and the identity more so than the rest of the body.
Is that cheaper than the whole body?
A neuropreservation is cheaper, yes.
So, Aubrey, this is where you're headed for?
I hope not. Antonio hopes not. But it's better than being buried or burnt.
Are you seriously telling me that you're going to have your head frozen in the hope that sometime in the future you'll be able to be Aubrey de Grey again?
That's not quite what I'm telling you. What I'm telling you is that if in however long it's going to be, I get to the point where I seem to be likely to die quite soon, then I would prefer to be cryopreserved in that hope, in the hope that I will eventually be revived, than to be buried or cremated and thereby remove any possibility that I would be revived.
What's going to happen to your body?
If I am still signed up as a neuro patient at the time that I'm cryopreserved, if I am cryopreserved, then my body gets disposed of. What may be more interesting is the question of how I'm going to get a new body. And that is an interesting question. It's something that's certainly beyond the abilities of medical science as we stand. But in however long it's going to be, I don't think it's at all far-fetched to suppose that we will be able to grow a body without a head, a body without a brain, and just sort of basically attach the revived head that was stored.
Imagine Aubrey's head on a new body. I wonder if he'd keep the beard. And another thing, with centuries ahead of him and aging cured, what would Aubrey do next? And what next after that? With all the time in the world, would even the most brilliant mind keep on discovering new interests and coming up with new ideas? Aubrey thinks that with regular brain rejuvenation, the longer you lived, the more creative you'd become. Is he right? Time to drop in on Freeman Dyson, the great theoretical physicist and mathematician. He's spent years thinking about the future and advising governments on everything from nuclear weapons to space travel. Now he's in his 80s and looking death in the face. If anybody could use another 100 years, you'd think Dyson could. Do you want to live forever?
No.
Why not?
Well, I think our humanity depends on the old ones getting out of the way so the young ones have a chance to do things fresh. I think that's more or less sums it up. I just can't, I wouldn't want to live in a world where all these 18th and 19th century figures were still around, and many of them are great people in their times, but they would probably become more and more hampering as they got more than 100 years old. I think it would bring science to a stop very quickly, and as I think Max Planck said, that science makes progress by funerals, and it's only when the old people die off the young people actually then it can go ahead. I think what he's doing is allowing the individual to grab more than this fair share and at the expense of future generations. So I find that on the whole very selfish.
Selfish or not, I'd have thought Dyson might nevertheless relish the chance to see what the future really holds. Maybe it's to do with personality and temperament, pessimism or optimism. So I went to see another scientist with a big brain, computing pioneer, philosopher, and the godfather of artificial intelligence, Marvin Minsky. Like Freeman Dyson, he's in his 80s.
So Aubrey de Grey, What kind of a man is he?
He's marvelous. I was really surprised because when I say he's marvelous, I mean he thinks the same way I do. Cars don't have diseases. They have rust. But if you have enough resources, you can replace each part and you still have the same car. It's a sort of philosophical joke.
And you'd agree with Aubrey de Grey that it's possible to do that with human beings?
It seems to me anybody who says it's impossible is a very strange pundit. How can you be sure that such a thing is not possible? You can't know till you try, and if you try and fail, you can't know that you tried the right thing. People who think they know what's possible or what's not are foolish. They don't know what's possible.
So do you believe that immortality really is something more than a dream?
Oh, I think immortality is a perfectly reasonable goal, and it's hard to think of a more important one. Well, I have hundreds of years of work to do right now, and I'm sure that if I got the chance to do that, I'd have thousands of years of work to do after that. So it's very frustrating to have done as much as I have and have this foolish reason to stop.
The foolish reason being?
That I've evolved from creatures that don't live long enough. I mean, turtles, some tortoises live longer than people. Why should we be satisfied with what we've got? Maybe you'd get bored after 1,000,000 years. No one knows, and I'd like the chance to see.
Aubrey de Grey says he needs two things to make his dream of living forever come true: $1 billion and an army of the world's best scientists. It's daunting, but so clear is his vision, and so confident is he, that Aubrey is convinced he can get both. Aubrey de Grey's crusade to conquer death really took off in 2005 when he assembled 100 of the world's leading scientists in Cambridge and excited them with his radical ideas. But research needs funding, so Aubrey came up with the Methuselah Mouse Prize. There's big money on offer for any scientist who manages to double the remaining lifespan of a middle-aged mouse. Aubrey imagines headlines like this. He reckons this kind of pub and the real money would begin to pour in. The man who runs the Mouse Prize for Aubrey is a Jehovah's Witness called David Goebel.
I believe immortality belongs to the province of God. I'm a deeply religious person. I believe that God wants us to be healthy and to be alive. That's why he gave us the gift of life.
Would you like to live forever?
Yes. He is pleased when a young child is given a vaccine that prevents a horrible disease. I think that he is pleased. He was pleased when the gentleman who invented floss came on the scene and reduced the amount of tooth decay. How he feels about Aubrey de Grey, well, you'd have to ask him.
Who, God?
Yes.
David Goebel and Aubrey were excited by the way prizes seemed to make big things happen, like the Orteig Prize for the first solo flight across the Atlantic, which Lindbergh won in 1927. It all began back in the 18th century with the famous Longitude Prize.
It was considered to be one of the three impossible tasks: finding longitude at sea, perpetual motion, and a universal elixir, which is interesting, to reverse aging. So one of them got solved by a prize, and so I thought, well, why not one of the other ones? The prize is funded by public donations. $3.5 million is where it stands today.
That's more than a Nobel Prize.
Yes, it is.
I was amazed to learn that all this money has been pledged by hundreds of ordinary people. If you pledge enough, you join the elite 300 club. I wondered what sort of people they could be, these ordinary people who want to live forever. I met one of them in New York, a 34-year-old computer specialist called Sean Hastings.
At a very early age, when I first figured out that there was a life expectancy attached to this whole experience, at that point, I started looking around for ways out. Let's say I could live for 1,000 years. Would I like to do that? Right now, I'm looking at it and saying I would. 500 years in, maybe I'll get tired of it. But I think that, you know, I could always opt out at that point. What really strikes people as scary is the fact that we may actually be getting there. We may actually be coming to the point where the science is there to make that happen. I actually wrote a poem on the topic. I have it here on my website, which I'm accessing through my phone. It's called Don't Lie Down. It goes, "You say you're glad one day you'll die, though not tomorrow or today. I say that's just a clever lie you tell yourself so you can play. And though you think it only fair, you leave your place to someone new. How would you feel to learn they knew a way to stay but would not share?"
But what if everybody felt like Sean Hastings and Aubrey? What if everybody wanted to live for thousands of years? Well, of course, the obvious problem is overpopulation.
The question of overpopulation comes up a great deal when one talks about life extension, and rightly so, because it's an important question. But ultimately, let's face it, you know, people don't just spontaneously become two people. They do it on purpose. Births have to happen, and they only happen when we want them to happen. So ultimately, it's a matter of choice. It's a matter of, do we want to continue our youthful lives of the people who are already alive, or do we want to have a turnover of people dying, and of course not just dying, but dying rather horribly, because aging, let's face it, isn't very much fun, and being replaced by people who are being born. I think that, you know, you can argue it both ways. There are plenty of reasons why we might think that the turnover of people might be good, but ultimately what's absolutely essential is to give the choice, to give people the opportunity to live indefinitely, to give societies the opportunity to choose to live indefinitely, rather than have children, rather than at the moment not having the choice, having to go for the turnover.
Aubrey says that to avoid overpopulation, the birth rate and the death rate would have to balance, and there could even be a law that says if you want a child, you'd have to find somebody to die first. Perhaps you'd sign your own death warrant and stop your life extension treatment. You'd die to make room for a new person.
If you enjoy life so much, what about giving some other people a chance who haven't been born yet?
There is a long tradition within society of treating people who are already alive as being more important than people who are not yet alive. You know, in the same way that we say that condoms are okay. You know, if you think that people are actually just as important who have not even been conceived yet as people who are already alive, then you should be having as many children as you can all the time. Now, have you?
No.
Right.
2.
Done.
And I don't intend to until at least 20.
Hello.
Hello.
This is Tatiana Covington, a 300 member.
Aubrey wanted me to meet Tatiana, whom he described as a very interesting lady, who's pledged $25,000 to the Methuselah Mouse Prize Fund. We sat there on the stoop as the sun went down, and I listened to Tatiana and Aubrey kicking around a few radical life extension ideas.
Now, you say you want to live forever, but what kind of plans do you have in that direction?
Stopping the aging process of joining the 300. And would be the first to have the GLO and UO genes put back in.
The
GLO and UO genes put back in. GLO, EC 1.1.3.8, does the fourth and final step in the biosynthesis of ascorbic acid in the glucose pathway, which picks off like 60 mg/kg/day from the Krebs cycle. We have the first 3 genes, but not the fourth, so we take the biosynthesis as far as gulonolactone, but not ascorbic acid. Gulonolactone is almost useless getting rid of reactive oxygen species. Ascorbic acid comes down on them like a lion. Why is this important? Because mammals who do have GLO, and that's almost all of them, can live like 9 to 14 times their maturity age, and mammals without it have a hard time reaching 3 because their antioxidant protection is shot to hell.
Aubrey, does Tatiana know what she's talking about?
I think to a large extent she does. I mean, I have some problems with some of the conclusions that Tatiana's come to with regard to the benefits that would be conferred simply by adding back a couple of enzymes.
Nature is what I decide it shall be.
It is unnatural for human beings to accept nature as it is.
In fact, we are not human yet. That's the way I see it.
What do you mean we're not human yet?
come on.
We haven't
Do you
fulfilled
really
our
think,
natural potential.
Do you really think that this is the end of evolution? That would be horrible. Evolution is only starting. Or as Arthur Clarke once said, with the landing of the first spaceships on Mars and Venus, the childhood of our race was over, and history as we know it began.
You find that exciting?
Oh, yeah.
There was something about Tatiana that puzzled me. Back at the hotel, I Googled her and all became clear. Aubrey knows all sorts of interesting people. Here's another one. The inventor, futurist and techno guru Ray Kurzweil and his virtual reality alter ego, Ramona.
Well, I've always wanted to be a female rock star. I had the idea that virtual reality technology would make that possible.
You can be someone else, and you can be where you want to be and with whom you want to be.
Kurzweil has a solid reputation for being right about the future, so I was keen to hear what he thinks of Aubrey's ideas. Kurzweil invented text recognition software and has helped the blind to see with his reading machines. He's also developed a method of controlling his own diabetes.
Good afternoon, I'm Aubrey de Grey and I've come to see Ray.
Kurzweil badly wants to be around when the immortality technology arrives, so he takes 250 health supplements a day to improve his survival chances.
Well, I'm going to ask you the question I'm asking everybody, which is, do you want to live forever?
I want to live indefinitely, sure. Each of these strategies that Aubrey has articulated will manifest itself over the next 10 or 15 years. We'll be able to add more than a year every year to remaining life expectancy, to your remaining life expectancy. So your life expectancy will move out away from you as you go forward in time. And go out 20 years from now, and when we can add some nanotechnology, we really will be able to repair anything that goes wrong and have radical life extension. One might say, well, okay, you can still get hit by a bus, but I mean, we'll have even means of dealing with that sort of thing. We'll ultimately be able to back up our mind file. I mean, people 100 years from now will think it's quite remarkable that people actually went around without backing up this most precious information. We'll ultimately actually be able to access that by sending tiny scanners in the capillaries of our brains that can actually scan our brain from inside and capture our mind file. I mean, we're talking now decades away, and you can talk about...
It was dawning on me that Ray and Aubrey and Sean Hastings and Marvin Minsky, who have the immortality bug real bad, are all computer people who think the digital revolution can be repeated in biology. And Ray even went on to out Aubrey and describe a future in which we could live in silicon-based circuitry instead of a body made of meat. This was almost too much to take in. If that's what the future has in store, what about now? Are there any life-prolonging techniques that actually work today? There is one, and it's called calorie restriction. This is yeast. Aubrey told me that if you feed yeast cells less, they live longer. So do nematode worms, brute flies, and even rodents. It seems that semi-starvation extends lifespan. Back in the 80s, Professor Roy Walford showed what calorie restriction could do for mice.
This particular mouse is 48 months old. That's longer than any mouse ever lives who is not on a restricted diet. This one has been restricted since about 12 months of age. Normally, mice never live longer than 36 months. This means that the aging process has indeed been retarded by this kind of procedure. One can slow down aging. This is equivalent in human terms to increasing maximum lifespan from the present level of about 110 years, the longest anybody ever lives, to 150 to 180 years.
Professor Walford practiced what he preached, and he wrote a bestseller called The 120-Year Diet. Sadly, he didn't get past 80. He died in 2004 of motor neurone disease. Aubrey himself doesn't go in for calorie restriction.
Beer works well for me. Some people, you know, they shouldn't drink too much. I have the right genes for beer. And drinking beer in the morning does me no harm at all. And it's only, what is it now? It's 10 to 10 in the morning, and this is my third pint of the day, and that's fine for me.
Aubrey told me about an important life extension experiment in Madison, Wisconsin, where scientists are spending millions of dollars trying to find out what calorie restriction does to primates. 18 years ago, they divided 76 young rhesus monkeys into 2 groups and locked them up for life. Hopefully the results will make this worthwhile. The monkeys in one group eat a normal diet, the others are fed 30% less.
This monkey here is from our restricted group. He's about 25 years old. And the other monkey is from our control group, and he's about 26 years old. You can see the restricted animal is much thinner. His coat looks really nice. He just has a younger looking appearance compared to the control animal. His coat is a little scraggly. He's obviously heavier. He's got a... he just looks less healthy and older than the restricted animal.
The Madison monkeys are in late middle age now, and the calorie-restricted group show none of the signs of old age, like diabetes, that are common in the control group. But it'll be another 10 years or more before they start dying off, and the scientists will know for sure if calorie restriction really can extend monkey lifespan. I was intrigued to learn that some human beings are so keen to live forever that they've turned themselves into calorie restriction guinea pigs, hoping they'll still be around when Aubrey's new technologies start to arrive.
Hello.
Rampage, hello.
I'd been invited to a calorie-restricted supper by April Smith and her boyfriend Michael Ray.
Oh, you don't shake hands, do you?
I don't normally, but it's all good.
Right.
Michael eats about half of what a normal man eats.
I am measuring 193 grams of scallops for each of the gentlemen. Yeah.
193 grams?
Yep.
That sounds
See?
rather
There you go.
precise figure.
We're very precise.
Can you just give me some idea about the total calorie value of what we're going to have?
Easily. He is having 639 calories, of which, and would you like to come see my software? This is computer software on which I do the nutrition, which 29% is protein, 31% is fat, and 40% is carbohydrates. 39.
I'm just up to just over 1,900 calories now, so that's a little over a third.
And what do most people get through?
A man?
Twice.
Yeah, well, 2,500 calories would be what they should eat.
Just tell me something, are you quite fit?
Well, I have acceptable sort of cardiovascular performance, and I have a sort of high strength to weight ratio, as it were, but obviously I'm not bench pressing 300 pounds.
He can lift me easily and carry me around as long as necessary.
Which is the most important thing.
That's really all that matters.
Don't calorie restrict my wine.
I am measuring it. But you're going to have 4 ounces each of this lovely, perfect. Can we have 1 tablespoon, please, of the chipotle salsa?
So you're having the nuts?
Yes, I have lower calorie needs. I'm having 10 grams of almonds, which is approximately 60 calories. And almonds are another very good fat source.
Michael and April have been living like this for 3 years now. Few people who try it manage more than a few months. It's just too hard. And there are side effects too, like lowered libido.
Libido just means interest in and orientation towards sex. It's your sex drive. And certainly mine is lower than it was prior to going on CR. But there's other aspects of sex in terms of, for instance, your sexual potency that either are not affected by CR or, not to brag, but seem to actually be enhanced. There seems to be an enhancement of staying power.
You'd really need to live longer to have time for all the sex you would have to have.
If you're around the same person for 250 years and they're still as young and vigorous, their hair still has all its color, their skin is still tight and clean, again, it just seems like life would just keep getting better and better.
People try to put us to down. Talking about my generation.
I suppose my generation thinks you have to learn to accept death only because there's never been an alternative. I'm 61 now, and the older I get, the more good reasons I'll need to find for thinking it's okay to die. I went to see the 83-year-old barrister and playwright, John Mortimer, to see what he's managed to come up with.
Do you mind that you're going to die?
Well, I'd rather not, but I mean, I think you have to die, and I think that a life that went on, drooling on forever, would be intolerable to you, an absolute nuisance to everybody else, because the whole young population of the world would have to work a million times more hard to keep alive these old farts, you know, hanging on. But I think also that there's a kind of artistic necessity about dying, like a picture has to have a frame, you know, you can't imagine an infinite painting, or a play has to have a shape and a final curtain. You can't imagine a play that goes on forever and ever. So all the good things in life have to have a beginning, a middle and an end, and all of those can be enjoyed. In fact, the ends of plays are probably the best things about them. The fact that you're here for what is a comparatively short time, between two vast eternities, it makes life rather noble in a way, and very significant, because that's what you've got.
How's this for an offer you can't refuse? How would you like to live, say, 400 or 500 years, or even more, and all of them in perfect health? There are those who say it's quite possible that sometime in the next 20 or 30 years or so, we'll be able to recondition ourselves for the first steps towards immortality.
Aubrey de Grey was about to get famous.
Now, if I asked you, would you like to live until you're 120, you'd probably say, yes, please. Well, now a Cambridge University scientist says that in just a few years, you may be able to do that. He's identified the 7 factors.
In 2005, Telly discovered Aubrey. Suddenly, he was the world's foremost biogerontologist.
My guest today believes the day will soon come when life expectancy is counted not in years but in centuries.
There's absolutely no limit to how long people could live once we have eliminated aging as a cause of death.
So high was Aubrey's media profile that the science journal Technology Review hired one of America's most respected medical commentators to go to Cambridge and meet Aubrey. Sherwin Newland wrote this classic text on death and dying. He was a surgeon for over 30 years, and he's a professor at Yale. I went there to find out what he thinks of Aubrey.
I'm absolutely convinced that in every generation people appear whose minds are beyond not just normal intellect, but of what we consider the great intellects of our time, even of an Einstein, even of a Newton. I think Leonardo da Vinci was such a man. You know, I've spent a lot of time studying Leonardo's life, but I think Aubrey de Grey is such a man. I contacted Aubrey. We chose a particular time to meet at the Eagle. Here we were in this busy pub with people smoking, and coughing, and walking, and talking, and laughing, and shouting. I never noticed anything except Aubrey de Grey as I stared into those blue-gray eyes hour after hour. The intensity, the excitement, the conviction, and the absolute craziness of the thing. There were moments when I felt like I was in a Marx Brothers movie, talking to someone who was beautifully articulate, made perfect sense, everything following from everything else, as long as you accepted the initial bizarre proposition, because things were so clear and logical after that. And of course, the initial bizarre proposition is, almost a quote, the most basic right that any human being has is to live as long as he wants to, providing the technology exists to keep him alive. The most basic right is the right to stay alive.
What's bizarre about it?
Well, that's hardly the most basic human right. As a matter of fact, it's not a right at all. One stays alive as long as nature decrees that one stays alive as an individual, as a member of a group in society, as an animal on this planet, one stays alive a particular length of time which is related to how long other species stay alive.
Is his vision a dangerous one?
Well, you know, I wrote this article about him, and in the article, as I was writing it and reaching the end, I thought, oh my God, it's the Aubreys, not that there's another Aubrey, but it's the Aubreys that will destroy this world. I think the world will be destroyed by well-meaning geniuses who really want to make it better, but whose vision of what will make it better is such that it is very different from the norms of society and science, and ultimately dangerous to our existence and to the existence of all life in the world.
Show in Newland's article carried the strapline, "He's brilliant, but is he nuts?" In Boston, the editor of Technology Review, Jason Pontin, was astonished by the huge volume of mail that flooded in support of Aubrey.
I remember one person said that if Jason Pontin loves death so much, perhaps he should try it out for himself.
You've got these two pictures of Aubrey de Grey.
I do.
What do we see?
I think you see a man of actually some sweetness if you look at the right-hand picture. I think you see a man who is utterly committed to his own eccentricity. Having been at school with him, I think I have his number.
Have you been in the same school?
Yes, Harrow. And a boarding school known, even amongst the great British public schools, for highly self-promoting individuals.
But I'm going to start here. A lot of you know that
Far from being fazed by the article, Aubrey launched a counterattack.
the main problem was that there was no critique of my science. There was this conclusion that I must be mad because my conclusions are extreme without any actual analysis.
Jason Pontin was forced to agree with Aubrey, so he invited top scientists to come up with a proper evaluation of Aubrey and his SENSE project.
No one wanted to go near it. No one wanted to touch it. No one wanted to be in any way involved with this debate.
Scientists?
Yeah, they wanted nothing to do with it.
What could it be about Aubrey de Grey that's scaring them off? In Phoenix, I'd watched him undergoing the world's most thorough medical, and he's in great shape.
All-out exercise, take big strides up that hill.
Could it be that the biogerontological establishment is afraid to take Aubrey on?
Let's talk about Aubrey de Grey.
No, let's not. What? Honestly, what is it that's so intriguing you about my good friend Aubrey? That he's telling everyone they can live forever? Wouldn't it be nice if there was some intervention, something that we could take or inject that would make us live forever? Of course, we all know, including Aubrey himself, that there is no such thing that exists today. What Aubrey is doing is he's offering the promise of immortality, which of course has been offered to people for thousands of years. All the people who have offered it and all of those who have received it and paid for it all share one common characteristic. Yes, they are all dead. This is the way in which it's done. I have had the fountain of youth. Can you prove me wrong? Can you prove that what I have just done, which is taken a sip of this water, will not make me live forever? Do you have any proof at all that it won't work?
But do you have any proof that it will?
Now that's the question, and that's the right question to be asking. Do you have any proof at all that the intervention you are proposing will do what you say it does? In the world of science, that's the question that we ask.
But are you saying Aubrey de Grey is a quack?
No. I would not say Aubrey de Grey is a quack at all. I would not use that language. It would be inappropriate. Aubrey, in my view, is not selling anything except ideas. And in the world of science, ideas is our currency. And that's what I love. We need that currency. And so I have no problem at all with the idea of creating that currency. You just don't go beyond what the currency allows you to buy. He's the new guru. He's the new optimist, the new person out there saying we can all live forever. If you look at somebody like that with his Rasputin beard and a message that everyone wants to hear, the combination of those two is extraordinarily appealing. Aubrey, when he first entered the field a few years ago, was just this inquisitive kid. You know, here he was in his 30s, didn't know really anything about the field of aging, was asking a lot of questions, send me papers, I want to read, I want to learn about this field. And I love that about Aubrey. That's why Aubrey made so many friends. And then at some point a couple of years ago, a new Aubrey appeared, an angry Aubrey. He's a bitter person, somebody who is angry with the scientists because we're not listening to him. He's angry with others out there who aren't providing the funding to test his hypotheses. And his anger is often directed at the very scientists he needs to conduct the research to test his hypotheses. And so he is not going to succeed as long as anger is the basis for his actions. I want the old Aubrey back.
And Olshansky wasn't the only scientist who had harsh things to say. In Ann Arbor, I met one of the world's leading researchers into the genetics of aging.
Aubrey de Grey is a terrific performer on camera. Aubrey de Grey knows how to phrase his ideas in such a way that they look like science and they appeal to people's instinct for simple, fast solutions. But Dr. de Grey hasn't had any real contributions to aging research, and his ideas are not spurs for further thought. For years, there have been tons of people promising miracle cures and radical interventions that could stop arthritis or stop Alzheimer's or stop skin aging. And gerontologists who actually do solid science don't want to be associated with that crowd.
The famous physicist Richard Feynman once coined the phrase cargo cult science, which Professor Miller thinks helps explain what Aubrey's up to. Cargo cult is a strange religion in the Pacific. The islanders had noticed that when Westerners built runways and control towers, magically planes would come out of the sky loaded with food and supplies. So they built their own runways and control towers from bamboo and waited for the planes to come. But of course they never did.
Feynman called this cargo cult science, that is, scientific presentations that look like science, that have the buzzwords of science, that have the decorations of science but don't have the content of science. The work and the ideas of de Grey have a cargo cult feeling.
But laboratory scientists like Miller are fascinated by the complexity of biological systems and how they work. Whereas Aubrey believes you don't have to know everything in order to find new ways to fix aging and save lives. He says it's like engineering, where you try things out and see if they work. The fact is, the history of science is full of unconventional people who break the rules and upset the establishment. I needed to find somebody with no gerontological axe to grind. So I arranged for a scientist I know called Martin Raff to meet Aubrey for a chat. The venue was Highgate Cemetery. Raff is a molecular biologist, but he's not directly involved with aging research, so I thought he could be impartial. He spent his life in a laboratory framing experiments to test narrowly defined hypotheses. Aubrey has never worked in a lab. He's a theoretical biologist who thinks he can see the big picture precisely because he isn't a specialist.
There's the man himself.
Aubrey de Grey.
Martin Raff, nice to meet you.
Absolutely, at last.
They covered a lot of ground, discussing the technical details of SENS and the 7 deadly things.
It may make the nerve cells just turn over and die. Then what are you going to do?
At one point, Martin began pressing Aubrey on the extraordinary idea I'd first heard about in the graveyard of adapting enzymes from corpse-eating bacteria to prevent Alzheimer's.
So here we are 7 years later, You still don't know whether any of these bacteria break down hyperphosphorylated tau. That's 1 out of 10,000 proteins in the nerve cell, and we still don't know. This is 7 years later. So now, how long will you know? How long will it take you before you know?
In fairness, the experimental work, the serious experimental work with actual students working on it properly only started 6 months ago.
But are they outstanding scientists turning their labs over to this problem?
Absolutely. Like I said, 3 labs already are working on this.
Okay.
We are not having trouble.
3 labs?
We are not having trouble.
Aubrey,
we haven't,
3 labs?
The only reason it's only 3 so far because we haven't got much money yet.
I'd like to know what you think about the quality of questioning that Martin is bringing to your ideas.
Martin's asking excellent questions. He's asking just the sort of questions that I love to answer, because I really want to know whether there are problems in the proposals that I'm putting forward.
Okay, Martin.
Yes.
Does Aubrey know what he's talking about?
Yes, Aubrey's very well informed, but I do think he's naive, and the naivete comes simply from not having done these kinds of experiments to know how difficult it is, how long things take, and how often things don't work.
Why should I believe you? I mean, you're retired. How do I know that his approach isn't the right approach and yours might be
All I'm saying
and...
is these are complicated things. Your ideas are hypotheses. You don't know enough to have good hypotheses. You know, you're too bloody ignorant to know what the next right question is, so you're shooting a bit in the dark. And when you have an
It seemed to me that the first round was Martin's. Aubrey bought the next.
It's not only a difference of conception about...
The conversation eventually came around to children. Aubrey isn't planning to have any.
I don't want to have children because I've always appreciated that what I want to do in life is to make a difference. And children are, A, very time-consuming, and B, something that lots of other people are very good at having. And so I would not be making a difference to the world if so much of a difference to the world if I occupied a lot of my time having kids, as I would if I didn't have kids and occupied myself in other ways, like being a scientist.
And this was where De Grey and Raff were poles apart.
The most important thing in my life by a long shot has been having children and grandchildren. So that's one part Aubrey hasn't experienced. This urge to procreate, to have your genes passed on from generation to generation, has got to be pretty basic. Must have been strongly selected for in evolution. So if you don't have children, then maybe this is the only way you could keep your genes in the pool, is to live forever. So maybe that's why he thinks this way, so passionately. My genes are already in the pool, and I suspect will continue to be in the pool, but not his.
Is this why Aubrey de Grey wants to live forever? It was time to get personal. So what's driving Aubrey de Grey in his crusade against old age and death? I felt I needed to know more about the real Aubrey. I tracked down an undergraduate friend of his called John McGuinness, who shares Aubrey's passion for punting. Together they once beat Oxford.
Well, a very unusual person. He speaks very quickly. He speaks faster than anyone else I know. I don't know if he listens at the same rate. Most people would call him mad. I think his upbringing, more so than most of us, I think he had quite a disjointed, unusual, perhaps unbalanced upbringing.
John told me Aubrey was an only child who never knew his father. He was brought up by his mother, Cordelia, in a big old house in Chelsea. I thought I'd like to meet Mrs. de Grey and asked Aubrey to take me to see her at the nursing home where she was staying while her Chelsea house was being done up.
Hello, how are you today?
I got no teeth today.
When Aubrey was a child, what did you want for him?
What did I want for him? I wanted him to be something special, and to, you know, be an important person. And I also wished he had better manners.
And are you pleased with how he's turned out?
Oh, yes, of course. I'm not mad about that beard. I can tell you, he grew it well. One day when we had a slight row, not for long, but I was very angry when I saw it, and no, nothing I can do about it. He thinks it's marvellous.
How do you feel about the idea of living forever?
I think it's great, but I'm just beginning. I mean, I've got to get some tooth implants, that's the first thing. That's why I'm just about to start my life. I mean, I'm only 71 and a half, and 81 and a half. I can never remember that. It's so unbelievable. I just don't believe it myself. I'm 81 and a half.
So Aubrey's mother got what she wanted, a son who's both special and important. And Aubrey's got what he doesn't want, someone he loves who's going to die. After leaving Cambridge with a degree in computer science, Aubrey worked in software development and met the love of his life, Adelaide Carpenter, an expert on fruit fly genetics. It was Adelaide who taught Aubrey biology, and in no time he got a PhD, which led to his investigations into aging. This was where he felt he could make a real difference to the world and his wife. She's 19 years older than Aubrey.
I hope to benefit from some of those ameliorations myself.
What do you mean by that?
I'm 62. I'm starting, my body is starting to show the side effects. We've just got an absolutely wonderful thing going. And yesterday was our 15th anniversary.
Adelaide is a bench scientist, like most of Aubrey's detractors, and I wondered what she thinks about their attacks on her husband.
One of the things that makes Aubrey's whole game plan difficult to assess is that the different ideas come from different fields, and no bench scientist has the time to read the literature widely outside of his or her own field. His detractors do not have that broad a base of knowledge. And they certainly give the impression of not being willing to read his papers. But it is certainly not the case that the entire scientific community thinks he's a crackpot.
So is he, or isn't he? Is Aubrey de Grey the new Darwin, or just another crank? In an effort to find out, back in Boston, Technology Review and Jason Pontin had offered a $10,000 reward to anyone who could produce a detailed and convincing evaluation of Aubrey's Sense project. And get this, Aubrey promptly made it $20,000.
So Aubrey's doubled your prize money.
He's a confident man.
I'm confident that I'm right because I have worked hard to get people who ought to know to explain to me why I'm wrong, and they haven't been able to.
With his scientific reputation at stake, how was Aubrey feeling?
I'm deliriously happy. I mean, how could anyone have a more fulfilling life than a crusader who's succeeding? And who had a loving wife who had a great time in their private life as well. You know, it's very hard to imagine how my life could be better than it is.
But the Sense Challenge had attracted a submission from a team of 9 scientists headed by Harvard biologist Preston W. Estep III. Their paper was highly critical. I asked Aubrey what he thought of Estep.
As I understand it, Estep feels very strongly about what you're doing.
Oh yes, he's completely demented.
Peter Estep?
Well, I haven't met him, you understand, but that's my impression from the way he writes.
Demented? Obviously it was important to meet this Dr. Estep.
Hi.
Hi.
So you've put in your submission to the Sense Challenge, $20,000.
Yes, we have.
Are you going to win?
We've been told that we've won.
Already? Not already, but the results aren't out.
No. They'll be published in an upcoming issue of Technology Review. But the editor, Jason Ponton, has told us that we've won. I have very little doubt that Aubrey Sen's plan is a fairy tale.
Is?
A fairy tale. We've got to get at what's right, not what we want. Old age does kill people. Everybody knows that. We're all aware of that. Something should be done about it. We're all working for that. He just likes to talk about it all the time to get people whipped into a frenzy, primarily so that they don't pay attention to the details of sense.
Why is he doing this?
Because it's easier that way. You have to shelve the passion. You have to say, I can't let my passions overwhelm my best judgment, my best trained judgment on how to solve this problem. One of the classic signs of pseudoscience is that there's a lone figure out there saying that everybody else is wrong, that he's the lone genius and there's some grand conspiracy against him. And this is no different. This is the exact same thing. And the reason it usually turns out that way is because that person has an emotional agenda.
That evening, in the hotel lobby, I noticed Aubrey. My phone has a camera, and I told Aubrey the news, that he'd lost the challenge.
So, Aubrey, I've talked to Peter Stapp, and he tells me that he thinks he's won the Sense Challenge. What do you say to that? That's right, let's see.
And guess what? Nobody had won. The judges weren't convinced that Aubrey's right, but neither did they think that Stapp and his colleagues had shown Aubrey to be wrong, or proved that sense is nonsense. And it occurred to me that this went to the heart of what science is all about. Bench scientists make a point of showing how their ideas can be judged on the evidence, but visions of the future like Aubrey's can't be proved or disproved in this way. I phoned editor Jason Pontin.
What they're saying is sense exists in a kind of antechamber of science, that if you wish to think well of it, you are free to find its propositions intriguing, but you're equally free to doubt it altogether, because sense doesn't rise to the level of being testable. Sense isn't yet true science as our judges understand it.
Right. Now, what does Aubrey de Grey think about all this, as far as you know?
Aubrey thinks he's been entirely kind of justified. Aubrey de Grey is in a kind of a triumphalist mood.
As things stand, the Sense Challenge has been an enormous advance, an enormous progress. I definitely consider it a consolidation of my advance to Gandhi Stage 3, and possibly even the first step of my advance to Gandhi Stage 4.
Can you explain that briefly and clearly, what you mean?
I think it was in 1941 that Gandhi made this famous quote about the progress of radical ideas in society, and which are opposed by the mainstream. And he didn't talk about science specifically, but it certainly worked in this context. He said, first they ignore you, and then they laugh at you, that's stage 2, and then they oppose you explicitly, and then they say they were with you all along. I think it's fairly clear that I have plenty of explicit, overt opposition now, rather than simply off-the-record ridicule, which is stage 2. So that's very much stage 3, and the quality of that opposition has been so poor so far that I think it's fair to say that the smart money is on stage 4, arriving rather soon.
But then, a strange twist in Aubrey's story when I called the Cambridge Department of Genetics.
Department of Genetics team speaking.
Oh, yes, hello. Could I speak to Dr. Aubrey de Grey, please?
He's actually left the university now.
He no longer works there?
That's right.
I asked to speak to Aubrey's boss, Professor Michael Ashburner, to find out why Aubrey had left.
He has used departmental facilities, for example, the departmental web server. He has used the departmental address for his hobby. And I regarded that as being unsatisfactory because it did indeed give the impression that he was a scientist employed by the University of Cambridge, and I have forgotten now how many times I have seen him referred to as Professor Aubrey de Grey, and the fact is that he was a computer technician.
Well, so what? Aubrey's part-time passion for biology turned into a full-time crusade, and now he's so famous he doesn't need Cambridge anymore. He's outgrown it, especially now PayPal entrepreneur Peter Thiel has just promised him $3.5 million of research funding.
I want to know why you seem to have the answer to absolutely everything.
Because that's what I've tried to find. You know, I've worked on it.
I like Aubrey a lot, but I still don't know if he's the new Darwin. We'll just have to wait and see. But that could take 100 years or more. If Aubrey's right, then I suppose he'll be around to celebrate. I won't. I'm already too old. And so is Adelaide, which is sad because Aubrey wasn't interested in aging research and immortality until he met her. And whatever he may say about what drives him, I suspect it was a love story all along.
Stay with 4 Countdown is next.